Hey folks, Danny here with episode 90 of the Noclip podcast. A solo intro because I have to explain exactly what's going on here. This is a bonus episode, something I recorded myself during the week. It's an interview with Jay Armstrong from Massive Monsters. They're the folks who worked on Cult of the Lamb, which is a game obviously we've been talking a lot about on the podcast recently. And we wanted to get more dev interviews on the feed. We obviously did a bunch of them back in the past, but we've been enjoying just having the sort of scrum with the crew every week. And quite frankly, what happened was there was too many good games came out these past few weeks, so we didn't want to sacrifice one of the weekly scrums. I really just wanted to talk about Monkey Island this week. I recorded a couple of dev interviews this week, and so we're deciding just to put them out on their own and see how that works. It's probably an appropriate way of doing it, especially as myself and Jay talked for somewhere around 30 minutes all about Cult of the Lamb, the design of the game, the history of the studio, lots of the interesting stuff I was interested in, like the aesthetics and the sound design and just how exactly they made this very unique game. And it's a fascinating chat, and I hope you enjoy it. I also want to, of course, give a shout out to all of our incredible Battle Pass holders: Cody Krieger, Forrest Pruitt, Andy Fagan, Cameron Ladd, George Sekotis, Jacob Godserve, and Tohir Tiliev. Thank you all so much for supporting this. The podcast is going to keep doing more of these, we think, developer interview stuff. And also, if you watched our video that dropped on Noclip Crew today, time of recording, you'll see our new studio. We are very soon, transitioning to having the podcast be a video as well. In fact, if you're watching this on YouTube, you can't see me right now, but you will see myself and Jay talking, although I sort of borked my own camera, so it doesn't look super great. But we're moving that over, so even the Scrum ones will be in video, and also we're planning, and we're pretty sure we're going to be live streaming those as well, which is pretty cool. So I hope you enjoyed this conversation I had with Jay. We're actually going to have another one of these developer interviews in a couple, probably in a week's time, I think. Earlier today, actually, I interviewed Raphael Colantonio and Julian Robbie from Wolf Eye Studios, all about Weird West and some interesting stuff that's dropping soon for that game. So check out for that on the feed as well. But until then, enjoy this chat with myself and Jay. Jay, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me today. It is currently 6 o'clock Pacific time. Where are you and what time is it?
Well, thanks for having me. It's 9 a.m. And I'm in Singapore at the moment.
Terrific.
So not too early, not too late. This is a good sweet spot for me. It's like I've just had my coffee. I'm ready to talk games.
Excellent. I've been building furniture in an empty studio all day, so I'm ready to sit down and talk to a developer. And I'm very excited to talk to you, not just because Cult of the Lamb it's one of my favorite games of the year. I've had a blast playing it. We talked about it a bunch on the podcast, but also in my research, I realized that you fall into a category of developer which is quickly becoming our favorite type of dev on Noclip, which is you make a really good game seemingly out of nowhere, and then we do research and realize that you've been plying your trade in the wonderful world of Flash games for a long period of time.
That's right.
Tell us a little bit about Massive Monster, the sort of collective of you guys, and not just the games you've released on, say, Steam over the past couple of years, but just like your history of making games, because it sounds like you've made a lot of games.
Yeah, we have. So yeah, you're absolutely right. As much as I wish I just made my first game, we exploded out of nowhere. It's been like more like actually when we released Cult of the Lamb, the very same month marked the 10-year anniversary from the first game I made with Julian, who's one of the co-founders.
Wow.
10 years ago, we'd released our first Flash game. And 10 years later, we released Cult of the
Overnight
Lamb.
success.
Overnight success, exactly. So that's how we all started doing our thing. We all started making Flash games, Newgrounds, Armor Games. We worked with Armor Games a lot. And we would go to, we were all individuals at the time. we would go to events and sort of gravitate towards like-minded people. And
Right.
so James, Julian, and myself all kind of found ourselves converging because we all had this sort of similar aesthetic, similar kind of art style that we really, really like, kind of influenced by Dan Paladin and Castle Crashers and things like that. So we found, and also wacky ideas. So we like made a few games together, but we didn't really ever form anything too specific until sort of Flash started falling away.
Right.
So it was the sort of the dawn of the mobile games started really taking off, and it was like, what do we do? It's every Flash developer was jumping into mobile, which I think, looking back was probably a very, I'm glad we didn't go down that route, because I think it's become very, very difficult now. Not that indie games are easy, but so we decided we all love console games, so like we'll go down that route instead. And so the three of us kind of clubbed together and formed Massive Monster, and the idea was to like move from Flash, so games that would take 5 minutes to play, take us 3 months to build, to building out full console games, which would take 10, 12 hours, 20-hour games that would take 3 years to make. But we had no idea what we were like undertaking. We had no idea the scale of the task from transitioning. So we had to like learn as we went. And when we first, what we pitched first was a sort of reimagining of our Flash game, which was called Super Adventure Pals, which was, you're a young boy with a giraffe in your backpack. And we thought like, well, let's do a sequel. And we went to every publisher, and every publisher just didn't respond to us.
Right.
Apart from Armor Games, who knew us for years because we made Flash games, and they were looking to transition into the sort of indie space as well. So
yeah, what a match made in heaven, that.
Yeah, exactly. So we sort of grew together with them into sort of making, it was just Steam and then later console and stuff. And so we spent 3 years making that game, and it did fairly well for us. Not like Cult of the Lamb well, but it did okay. It did fine. We could keep making games, which is kind of the goal. And we did another one, which was, again, Armor Games sort of asked us to make it. It was another adaptation of a Flash game into a console game, which is called Never Give Up. And that one didn't do so quite as well. That was like an interesting project, but what it meant was that by the time we came to do Cult of the Lamb, we had 2 console games that we could show, and so other publishers started to actually take our call, and so so I'd made Adventure Pals just myself and Julian, and then Never Give Up was just myself and James.
Okay.
And so we're like, okay, we've done these 2 fractured projects. The idea was like, make as many games as possible and release them, and they'll all do. And we realized that actually, no, that's a very time consuming and difficult way. And you've only got, if your time is like 100%, you don't get more time. There's only a certain amount of time you can give to a game. So we decided, let's all just pull in together and make one really, really good thing that we pour our hearts and soul into, and that's where we came to with Cult of the Lamb.
Excellent. So explain the timeline a little bit to me, because it's hard sometimes when you go back in history, especially looking at Steam pages, to try and figure out exactly what was going on, because Adventure Pals has a release date here of 2018, Never Give Up has 2019. So was that the case? And have you only worked on Cult of the Lamb? Basically, is it a COVID game?
Yes. So Adventure Pals and Never Give Up, I worked on at the same time.
Okay.
So I was doing 2 games at once for like 3 or 4 years, and then they both came out like a year apart. So that was something I don't recommend to people, is being the only programmer on 2 games at once over 4 years. Yeah. But again, like, it's like the great thing about the Flash games was we could make a game in 3 months and put it out there. And so like we very much kind of cut our teeth on working really hard, trying to produce as much as possible, as quickly as possible, as good as possible. And that ended up serving us quite well when it came to the methodology behind Cult of the Lamb, which is a very iterative process of kind of make something really quickly. Does it work? No, scrap it. Make something, and so it's actually, it was a benefit in the long run now looking back, but at the time, obviously it was quite a challenging time. And so, yes, that's right. So the 2 games came out 1 year apart, but they've been in production for like 4 years.
Right.
And because I've been waffling, I've forgotten the second part of your question.
Well, how about this? Because I'm very interested in, you keep talking about the 3 of you, the sort of like Voltron that has come together to work on Cult of the Lamb. Like, I guess there's always like, support people involved in Lots and Lock and all these different types of things and music and whatnot. But in terms of like core development team, was it just the 3 of you on Cult of the Lamb, or did you have more like support?
Yeah, for the first, so it was a 3-year development plus a year sort of prototyping and pitching and stuff. For the first year and a half, it was just the three of us.
Okay.
But since then, we brought on two full-time programmers, Harrison and Will, who are both brilliant. We love very much, and they're going to stay with us.
Brilliant.
But over the course of, as you say, we had contractors, and it kind of expanded to 9 people at one time. Was the biggest it got to. But aside from that, it's sort of 3 to 5
almost
to 6.
Almost double digits.
Yeah, almost so close. So close. But I think the reason the game is as big as it is with so few people is kind of the history that I've just sort of been talking about. Yeah.
Institutional knowledge, that sort of, you don't make a great game overnight. You've done your 10,000 hours of learning or whatnot. There's so much about the game I want to talk about, or ask you about rather, because it's always so fascinating to learn about these projects, especially once the dust is settled. And it seems like, I mean, people have been raving about it. It's got, something like 25,000 very positive average reviews on Steam. It's obviously come out on other platforms as well, and people seem to be really enjoying it. I want to ask a question, I guess, and it's a really boring try question, but I think with this game, it's the question that I've wondered from the start, because there's so many different sort of layers to this game. It's partly sort of a dungeon crawler. It's partly sort of a city building game. Thematically, it has so many interesting things going on, not just in terms of you're building a cult, but also just in the depth of cultish lore that's in here is really fascinating. So, obviously, this game does not get, the way it is now doesn't get written down on a piece of paper. I can't imagine that you came up for the concept of this game as it is now, on one A4 sheet. So I guess, how did it evolve? What was the sort of maybe the seed that we can still recognize today of the game, and then what parts didn't make it in, and when did other aspects of the game sort of get layered in there?
Yeah, it's a great point. No, there's no documentation anywhere. It's all been iteration and trial and error. But you're right. The core of it was I just had this sort of mixing a sort of roguelike dungeon crawler with a colony sim base builder, and just kind of pushing them together. I think it'd come out of a science fiction book I'd read, and they all lived, it was all these people who lived on this sort of air balloon, and the world was kind of toxic, and some people would dive down and get things and bring them back up. And I just thought that's such a great sort of loop for a game.
Right.
It's you've got your thing, and then you go down into danger to bring, and I love that idea of being responsible for a group of people, which it's so hard to capture that sort of emotional relationship with NPCs, because usually they're either just standing there, or they're on their little day cycle, and they're walking here, and then they're doing animation there, but they're not, you can't really interact, you can't really form an attachment. So the goal was really, form an attachment with your sim, your colonists, and then be responsible for providing for them, and going out into danger, and bringing the stuff back. And that was the core of it. And so I put a prototype together, and I took it to James and Julian, and I think they both really liked it. But Julian kind of said I love this, but it's also terrible. My concept was you're on the back of a flying whale, and then you dive down into the world, and the problem was, as I explained that concept to people, that people's eyes would just kind of glaze over and be like, oh, I don't know what you're talking about, man.
Right.
And so he very astutely said, we need to have a one line, what is the player fantasy that we're trying to deliver with this game? And so then there was 9 months of trying to figure that out. We tried you're a lost god, and you're trying to regain followers, and so there was always that sort of religion-y sort of element to it. And then we tried, actually there always was, because the next thing we tried was create your own hell kind of thing.
Okay.
So you go out and find souls, or reap the souls and bring them into hell, and then you'd sort of punish them, you get points for punishing them. But the problem was the art style was so damn cute that you did not want to punish these guys, because you just felt horrible. So that didn't work either. And so the next thing we tried was the cult. And as soon as we put that in, it just kind of clicked into place. I'm oh, okay, this works, because you want to exploit them. So we want to push that you're exploiting these guys. And so that's for your benefit, which then improves your chances in the other side of the game, dungeon. Then we've got this, we always have to collect the resources thing. That worked and come back. And so when we found that, and the freedom to be as evil as you want, So if you want to mess up these cute guys, you really, really can. You have a lot of options. And we put a lot of breadcrumbs to kind of tempt you into doing that. But if you want to just be a benevolent leader, you totally can as well. So that was kind of the process we went through it. And then the next journey was sort of figuring out, right, how do we deliver on this promise that we've made? We promised you're going to run a cult, right? So what does that mean? And how can we make that games mechanic? Because the things like the rituals and the sermons and things, I've never seen those in other games. And so when you're making when you're making a Metroidvania, it's like, okay, cool. So we'll have the double jump and we'll put that there. And then that'll be, you know what you're making. And then it's just a case of making a really, really good one. Whereas this one, we didn't really know what we were making until about 6 weeks ago, when it 2 weeks before it released. Right. And then we're like, oh, that's what the game is. Okay.
Yeah, I can imagine that, you can sort of you could get very lost in the weeds on either one of those games, or, because it's funny, I never thought about this game as like a God game before, but then the two prototypes you talked about before, one sounded a little bit like Black and White and one sounded a little bit like Dungeon Keeper. So I was kind of thinking, and maybe it's because I interviewed Peter Molyneux like 2 days ago, and I have Bullfrog on the mind, but I guess the question is, how did you stop, as complex as that sim is, and I imagine in terms of code, there's with a day-night cycle that you could be in the dungeon while all this stuff is happening back at the base. Like, I can't imagine how complex it is. But for the player experience, it's not that complex. It's actually quite like elegant and easy to master, and it doesn't feel overbearing. It doesn't feel like a job you have to go back to. How did you balance that? Like, there's a lot going on there, but it doesn't overwhelm the player, I guess.
First of all, I'm really happy to hear that it feels that way. That's exactly what we wanted. You're absolutely right. We would get super duper deep into one side of the game and then test it, and the other side would be rubbish. And it only works when both sides are good and feeds into it. So for a long time, we were a bit worried about it, to be honest. But what we found was that the more we stripped things back and simplified things, the better the experience. So originally, you didn't have a global hunger, you didn't have a global faith. Each follower had a faith and a hunger, and because a lot of this was inspired by RimWorld. So that's like one of my favorite games, and that's kind of so in that game you look at what their thoughts are, and he hasn't got a good bed, or she's hungry, or okay, I'll solve those problems. But because you're playing this with a controller in your hands, or you're not really, it's not like a base builder game, traditional one, where you have a lot more control and you can pause it and get really. We found that actually that was just overbearing, particularly when you got like 10 followers. You right. just can't. You just go talk to everyone. It's very tedious. And so we had this radical change where we just said, okay, strip it all out. That's actually why the follower thoughts is still in there, because that's how it worked. That's actually just vestigial, and we'd paid for all the localization, so we're like, oh, we better leave it in, because it's otherwise just a
sunk
big waste. So, sunk cost. So it's in there. It looks really cool. It's fun if you want it. It's there. And so and so every time, and then the flip side of that was the dungeon, because in games like Binding of Isaac, Hades, all these games, you just go and go and go and go and go until you die, and then you come back. And so we thought, right, that's what you have to do. But of course, as you go and go, then your followers starve to death, and so we go, okay, we'll put teleporters. So once you've got certain, once you've done a few rooms, you can choose to go back. But you've been so conditioned to just keep going that you think, no, it's wrong. It's failure to go back.
Right.
And so we had this big problem. And when we eventually said, okay, here's a mini boss, and then bang, you're going home, whether you want to or not, suddenly that stress for the player went away. So
that's so funny. Wow.
Yeah.
And
so again, you have
and that must have been quite scary to ultimately take a really big choice away from the player. That must be a scary prospect as a designer.
Definitely, but but also because we do it so quickly. We always kind of leave in a bool somewhere that like lets us revert whatever crazy change we've done. So it's like, okay, well, let's put in a sort of if mode equals go home or whatever, then have the teleporter have it lock otherwise. So we always knew that whenever we're making these changes, there was a lot of experimentation and a lot of like freedom to just we got to figure this out. We got to try, and we had a really aggressive schedule because we wanted the game to come out. Because our previous games took like 4 years, and so we wanted the game to come out. So we were always up against it. So that pressure was really powerful in being like, right, we don't have time to discuss this. Let's try it.
Wow. But you're also, like you said, you know, you didn't allow yourself to get caught in that sort of technical debt problem of you know, being stuck too far down this mode.
Yeah.
You were always sort of designing with the idea of, oh, we might change that, we might back it, insert here. That's a big part of your process too.
We must have said the phrase minimal viable product or MVP about 50,000 times a day, because we just like, just try it, just MVP, just get it working to the minimum standard so we can see if this is the way to go. And if it doesn't, then cut it out, and you know, we go back. And so one real learning process for us was like, never get attached to an idea, because
Right.
it's, you know, never have pride or attach yourself to that idea. If it's because we had this clear, like, it's a game about running a cult. These are the things we need to deliver, things we need to make sure we're hitting. We knew that, we all agreed, and we all knew exactly what that was. We could all agree when something, and it's obvious as well. I think, like, if you're fighting for a system in a game, and everyone else is telling you it's not quite right, I think you in your heart know like, it's not quite right. So we just kind of cut all that out and just said, no, that's got to go, and let's try something else.
Excellent. One thing I have to ask you about, because I think as much as I enjoyed this game's systems, and I spent a lot of time exploring it and trying different things and messing around with, like you said, different rituals and sermons, and there was so much going on. The one sort of comfort blanket of the entire experience is, I don't know if we have a word for this. Is it presentation? Is it vibe? But just the art style and the audio design is just so dialed in. Like the unique sounds of moving in and out of, I don't know, menus, I guess, in one sense, like the little sort of pings and the sounds of the chorus and all these little just tiny little elements that I just loved every moment of fucking around in the game. Can you tell us where that comes from? You know, the graphics, of course, but also the audio, because I feel like audio always gets kind of lost in the wash.
Yeah, well, yeah. To start with the audio, I too feel the same. There's the first kind of curse you get, the projectile. When I first heard the sound, it was not what I expected at all. I thought it would sound like a or something, but it was this sort of bizarre kind of scream process that it blew my mind, and I just thought, wow, that's amazing. So we got Eunice Turner, who is a fantastic audio designer. He's done any big indie game, he's probably done it. He's probably done the sound. So we managed to get him on board, and we were all, we were just like, it doesn't matter, he's the best, let's just get him if we can. And it was definitely the right decision. And similarly with the music, we got Narayan, who's Riverboy Beats is his like Spotify name. And it was a similar thing. We actually were fans of his band before we met him, but again, it was just, he's awesome, bring him in. We don't know quite what we're doing with him, and we ended up just saying things to him like, oh, we've got this new level, it looks like new area, it looks like this, we want it to sound like this and this and this, but also ignore us and just do whatever you want. And in the end, like, now we just don't give him instructions. We're like, oh, we need something for this, and he just comes back with something that, it's almost like when we put our grubby fingerprints on it, it ruins it. Right. It's better to just let him do his thing. So again, there's like a tiny team, we don't have time to kind of look over everything, and so what we tried to do is just get the really super talented people that we love and just let them off the leash and let them do their thing. And I'm so thrilled to be able to work with those guys. And we're going to, I hope, continue to work with Narayan on future things as well. He's just awesome. And then onto the art style. Yeah. Similarly, James has just been drawing games for like 10, 12 years, through the Flash. That's all hand-drawn stuff. And we knew going into this project that I felt like I wanted us to elevate away from 2D a little bit, and try and like step up a little bit what we're doing. But the problem is we've got, Julian and James are both 2D artists. So it's kind of like, how do we make this game not just a 2D game, but also use our 2D art? And so we obviously looked at Don't Starve, and I just thought, why aren't more people doing this? Like, this is just brilliant. Like, right. Why? The game.
It's funny. I hadn't made that connection. Actually, it's funny. Because it doesn't feel derivative. I don't see Cult of the Lamb and think, oh, that reminds me of something else. But you're right. Yeah, I totally. I see it now.
Maybe that's where I stole the technique, but in terms of the overall visual style, James and Julian are far too talented to be as derivative as I am. So I just kind of, we had a lot of discussion. I just felt like this is the way to go. And in the end, it made things more difficult in terms of design because, we'd originally designed these dungeon rooms that had like more like Enter the Gungeon with like lots of different paths and things, but it just visually, it just was too confusing. And so again, this is again stripping it back and making it simpler. And we just went with the sort of Binding of Isaac one room, combat, next room combat, because which is kind of a shame because I had designed this like way where I could create the sort of mesh to go around and create these shapes, but then again, just had to scrap it because it didn't make the game better. So
don't get too attached.
Don't get too attached. Exactly. And so the only thing about James and Julian's artwork, which I will publicly criticize them on about, is that it's too cute. Everything they do, too cute. Isn't it a wonderful juxtaposition though you landed on, where it's like the cuteness and the hellishness, it just like it shines through even that more. It's like, it reminds you of things like Futurama or something. Whenever Futurama gets dark, it feels super dark, because it's because you're not expecting it, or when the lamb's eyes turn from that cutesy little sort of anime face to like, red or bleeding white or red, whatever. Yeah, just in the fire and they does a little spin. It's just, what a wonderful little and restrained art palette as well. Like, lots of reds, blacks, and whites all over the place. Yes. Yeah. I mean, they're both brilliant in their own way. They both. So James did like the majority of the sort of actual drawing of all the characters, but Julian would sort of design some of the other characters. But also, he was very, very concerned with the overall palette, the overall the sort of the LUTs we'd use, the sort of colors we'd use, and making sure that it was very striking visually, and so they work together really well on that. And it's no matter what they do, it gets cute. We kept saying like, make it darker, make it scary, make this boss more scary. But the nice thing about the cute things, it makes you fall in love with the followers because they're adorable, so it kind of worked out.
It's also like, I found it very satisfying that like, and I won't, I won't spoil anything or talk about the end of the game, but the whenever you would beat a boss, you could also, indoctrinating them into your cult and having them return to their sort of normal form, and then just be another, pleb in your army of worshippers. I always made sure that they were praying. You know what I mean? When they came back, I wouldn't put them on lumber or on rock. Yeah, no, you need to get on your knees and pray for making me go through that boss battle. I want to ask you about that as well. Difficulty. It was not a game that I found particularly tough in terms of combat, but I didn't mind because I guess, that's sort of almost part and parcel with roguelike games. It was interesting to play a game that I didn't find super challenging, but what I didn't mind because my brain was obviously thinking about these other things. There was enough going on that I had to worry about that I didn't need one of the things to be super difficult, if that makes sense. Was that like an intentional thing on your part to, was it a harder game at one stage? Was it an easier game?
Yeah, it's definitely intentional. A lot of it was to do with when we announced the game, there was a lot of like, oh, this is like Hades meets Animal Crossing. And so people seem to be excited about that, and we thought like, oh shoot, that's a very different audience, right? Animal Crossing is like a very relaxing game, and Hades is a very sort of intense game. And so if we have people coming to us who love Hades, and we have people, we need to find a difficulty that will be good for both. And so we do have like the harder and harder, extra hard difficulties, which are challenging and really if you're good at roguelikes, then you should probably play on hard sort of thing. And there's an easy mode, which is almost like combat's almost trivial. It's so easy. But yeah, it was just like our attitude. Like, we want to include as many people. We want everyone to play this thing and everyone to enjoy it. And it's definitely not as hard, but sometimes you're on the edge. You see, our goal was always with the combat, like ideally, it's not like you might not necessarily lose, but we want you on the edge. So like whenever you're like half a heart, one heart, then you're more likely to get another heart to keep you in the game. So it was the idea of just keeping you in that sort of biting point. That was our goal with it.
Excellent. So I guess, what's it been like post launch? Obviously we're still sort of in the shadow of launch. I'm sure there was a bunch of patchwork and all that sort of stuff that has to happen, especially launching on multiple platforms at the same time.
Yeah.
But what was it like? The reception. How did how do you feel about the launch of the game? When did you feel that way? And I guess what's next?
Yeah, a great question. I feel like I haven't really processed quite what it is, because we just immediately got back to work like almost the next day, and we're like, oh, we got all these problems, and we're talking with our porting partners about the console version, trying to help with that, and then we want to fix all these things that are coming in, because we had 1 million people playing it in the first week, which is like unbelievable. Like I was like, maybe because we're with Devolver, maybe in a year or two we might get to 1 million or something like that, like in a week. So obviously all these problems, we've been testing QA for like 4 months straight, and we thought we got everything, and suddenly it's like the floodgates open.
Your QA pool is suddenly like 200,000 or whatever, infinitely bigger. Yeah,
it exploded. So there hasn't been a lot of time for reflection. I mean, I don't know how to process it really. I mean, it's a lot of people playing the game. It's a lot, and 2 days earlier, or like 2 weeks earlier, no one had played it. And so it was very, very strange. It was very exciting watching the trajectory of the game, because we didn't know if we would just be we had no idea what people would think, because like we made the game during the pandemic, so we didn't go to any shows. We actually haven't seen each other since before the pandemic as a team.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, so we actually are going to meet up in PAX Australia in a few weeks' time, and that will be the first time that the team is together. So I think that's when it will all kind of sink in, and we'll all like celebrate and raise a few glasses. But so what happened was we did the Steam Next Fest, which is where they released demos, and there was like 1,200 games, and there are 3 categories, and we were number 1 across all 3 categories for the whole week.
Oh my God, that's wild.
That was really wild. Every day I kept like refreshing. I'm like, this can't be right. This can't be right. They're not still. And
it's just doing it because I have it like I'm in my developer account. I'll go to private browsing and see if it.
Yeah. It's like it's just trying to make me feel better. And then we have a Twitch integration, so we released that like a little bit earlier to streamers and things, and that's when pre-sales started taking off and wish lists started exploding. And then so by the time we came to release, we'd actually cleared our development budget recoup before the game even came out. For an indie game, that's unbelievable.
Wow. Based on what? On pre-orders or?
Yeah, just pre-orders. Yeah, so it's crazy. So it just kind of like took off and just kind of exploded. And since then we've just been trying to like, as I say, we came back Monday and we're like, right, stand up. What are the bugs? Let's get on them. Let's get this as stable as possible. But yeah, it's also strange. I went on the Reddit yesterday for Cold Lab, and it's just pages and pages of stuff. I'm just like, all these people playing the game. What's going on here? So I think I haven't figured it out. I don't have a good answer. But I'm very happy. I'm very grateful for success, and we're gonna keep working on it and keep improving it. And as I say, we haven't stopped working. We're not going to stop working. We're going to keep. And we have more ideas for how to expand the game and add more content and address the biggest sort of the parts of the game that need more love. We're doing it right now. We're kind of adding to that and growing it, and we just want to keep making the game as good as possible, because a lot of the ways we set it up to be like that, you can put more locations in the world map, you can do more dungeons, you can have more buildings, and so we just want to continue to expand it and make it bigger and bigger and better, and hopefully turn it into a indie classic at some point if we can keep going.
Wow. Well, you're on your way already. Fair play, and I hope you all have a great time in PAX Australia. That sounds like a party a long time in the making as well. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today. And it's interesting to hear, I played that game, and it's one of I have to play a lot of games just for work, and then I have my games I play for fun, and oftentimes those are one and the same thing. But usually when I complete them, I stop playing, and I just could not. I was going. I'd beaten the final boss, and I'd done all that, and then I was just like looking for something to do, and I was looking at Steam achievements. I was like, I need to figure out some other reason to keep playing it. So to hear that, maybe you'll be adding some extra stuff. Sounds very exciting as well. Jay Armstrong, thank you so much for talking to us, and best of luck in PAX Australia. And enjoy those pints, enjoy those coffees, whatever glass you raise.
Thank you so much, Danny. Thank you for speaking to me. And as I said, before we started, I'm such a huge fan of what you do. You're amazing. Please keep doing what you're doing. And thank you for talking to me. I'm super grateful. So it's been super fun.
Anytime. Thank you very much.